afternoon, Andrew. We've heard Anthony Albanese, Penny Wong. They say there's nothing to see here, but I've obtained this list of Palestinians who've been granted visas from Labor. And Andrew, one of them has endorsed the terror attacks on October 7. This is an extraordinary story. I'm going to have those details in a minute. Also tonight, Queensland opposition leader David Crisafulli will be on the show. He's going to talk about whether rats are now fleeing the sinking ship ahead of the state election as crime continues to plague the state. Also, Albanese is set for another battle with people trying to run a business as he pushes for them to work from home. No doubt he makes his own staff turn up to the office, though. And the man who was dragged off by police at the Melbourne City Hall protest will join me live. Why are Victorian police refusing to get tough on those aggressive left-wing protesters? But let's return to this exclusive tonight. Tonight, I can reveal the Albanese government has granted an Australian visa to a Palestinian who liked horrific posts that celebrated the massacre on October 7. Labor gave Zahar Abiamro a visa after the October 7 terror attacks, and he arrived in Australia late last year. The 21-year-old is now living and working in Melbourne. Abu Amro is one of 80 Australians on a list we've obtained of nearly 500 Palestinians who've been granted visas to leave Gaza. On October 7, when, as you know, 1,200 innocent Israelis were slaughtered, Abu Amro liked this tweet, which shows Palestinians celebrating in the streets, and it congratulates Hamas on the attacks. It says, "Congratulations to Operation Al-Aqsa Flood," which is how Hamas describes the October 7 invasion, which embodies the will of the steadfast Palestinian people and their courageous resistance. At this crucial time, we stand alongside our brothers and sisters in Palestine and stress the need to support their cause and work to end the occupation and establish their independent state. That on October 7. On October 7, he also liked an image that celebrated the kidnapping of an Israeli who's being dragged through the streets by Hamas without any pants on. And he liked a tweet that had this image attached to it. And we need to warn you, this image is highly distressing. It purports to be Hamas holding Israeli hostages the day after the terror attacks. Abu Amru also liked this tweet that shows the Hamas paragliders invading Israel. And it says, "The parachute landing of Muslims in Gaza was based on their trust in God. And the Zionists are sad in their dancing, so we won." And it goes on. And then also this one that says, "Enter against them through the gate, for when you enter it, you will surely be victorious." He also reshared a post on Twitter on October 8 that expressed support for what he called, the post he shared called the Palestinian resistance. And then on LinkedIn, he liked a post calling for a boycott of Dell Technologies because its chairman and CEO, Michael Dell, said he stood with Israeli President Isaac Herzog and Israel. In December, Zahar started a crowdfunding page where he speaks about how his family are out of Gaza with the exception of his father. He said the funds raised through this campaign will be used to facilitate the safe and swift relocation of my father from Gaza. The money will cover the costs associated with securing necessary documentation, travel expenses, and any unforeseen challenges that may arise during the process. Now, Abu Amro is now in Melbourne. We put questions to him today. He says he doesn't support the terror attacks from October 7. He claims his Twitter account may have been hacked. Now, this right here is the list of hundreds, nearly 500 Palestinians who've been granted visas to leave Gaza. 81 of them headed for Australia. It includes their name, date of birth, citizenship status, and their Palestinian ID number. Another name on this list is blogger, journalist Plestia Alakad. She has more than 4 million followers on Instagram, and the Jerusalem Post has described her as spreading Hamas propaganda that Israel had bombed the Al Ali hospital and killed more than 1,000 people. Here she is, the day after that attack, when mainstream media outlets globally had already corrected the record to state that Israel had no role in this.
Yesterday, a complete massacre happened in Al Ahli hospital. Around 1,000 civilians were killed and martyred. Right now, I'm with Dr. Ghassan Abu Sitta. He was there. What's happening is a complete genocide. Like, even the doctor, he lost his phone. He was like in the ambulance last thing with wounded people, and right now he doesn't know where his phone is.
So that was all false. It was an Islamic Jihad rocket that misfired and hit the hospital, and only 50 people were believed to have been killed, not 1,000. Israel had nothing to do with this. On October the 12th, so just a few days after the terror attacks, Plestia claimed on British GB News that Israel was committing a genocide in Gaza.
Today, I'm telling you what happened yesterday and what is still happening. It's a genocide, literally a genocide. It's not a massacre.
No mention of the terror attacks just a few days earlier. The Jerusalem Post reports that in her posts, she has not provided any explanation for the commencement of the airstrikes in Gaza, namely the October 7 massacre. At a time when social cohesion is sadly collapsing in Australia and anti-Semitism is at unprecedented levels, the Australian government, the Labor government, needs to be careful about who it grants precious visas to. And our revelation tonight that the Albanese government has granted a 21-year-old Hamas sympathiser a visa calls into question the adequacy of their security checks. We revealed on Monday's program, and this has now become a big story this week, that the Albanese government had quietly nearly tripled, the number of Palestinians they're trying to bring into Australia, with 2,273 granted visas since October 7. We also reported that the visas were being granted in as little as 1 hour. Here is a DFAT official making that admission to James Patterson, who did an extraordinary job at Senate estimates.
Some individuals claim their visitor visa for relatives were approved within 1 hour.
It is possible.
Sure, but how could you possibly do all the necessary security and other checks in just an hour from an applicant? I mean, that's lightning speed approval.
When we apply that vast range of information to consideration of visitor visas. So if you look globally, a very large number of our visitor visas would be done inside an hour. The assessment is essentially looking at all the information we hold and applying that in a number of ways to the application in front of us.
Foreign Minister Penny Wong promised Australians that rigorous security checks would be undertaken when she first announced that 860 visas had been issued late last year.
How have a few short weeks been enough time, though, to do proper security checks? Because as James Patterson said on our program last hour, that Dennis Richardson said this could take months, not weeks.
We take the advice of agencies and the advice I have been given is that all appropriate security checks, character checks and identity checks have been undertaken.
How can you be certain, though, that these people aren't linked with or sympathetic to Hamas?
Because we have undertaken, the government and its agencies are undertaking appropriate security checks. I'm very aware of the focus that the government has and security agents have on keeping Australians safe.
She went on Sunrise, held press conferences. There were so many television interviews and others where she insisted that rigorous checks were taking place. Well, those commitments were hollow. Now, we've gone back to Penny Wong this week to say, how can these checks be rigorous when they're only taking as little as an hour? Well, the response, this is best directed to the Department of Home Affairs. She doesn't want to have anything to do with this now. She's backing away from her earlier commitment that those security checks were thorough, telling us to go to Home Affairs to Claire O'Neill. Well, we asked Claire O'Neill's office today about how some of the people we've spoken about tonight were granted visas. Their response was that we don't comment on individual cases. The Prime Minister, though, today defended that security checks were being thorough, even if they took as little as an hour. Here he is.
The checks are exactly the same as what was in place under the former government. Peter Dutton is someone who no issue is too big to show how small he is. He is someone who has multiple fear and scare campaigns.
He always does that. He turns matters of public interest into an attack on Peter Dutton. Opposition leader Peter Dutton has expressed concern in an interview with Ray Hadley today that the security checks just aren't good enough.
They're now bringing in 2,000 people from the Gaza Strip during the course of a war where Hamas, a listed terrorist organisation in our country, is in control, and they're bringing people in with one-day approvals, so not with the requisite checks that you would expect, the biometrics checks, etc. They're bringing those people in record time, and you wonder why we have problems in this country. And again, I think the Prime Minister is creating another issue here. His responsibility is to keep our country safe, and at the moment he's presiding over decisions which are doing completely the opposite.
Now, let's be clear. Of course, innocent civilians in Gaza, innocent families deserve refugee status, and they deserve to be out of harm's way. The loss of life in Gaza after the Hamas terror attacks in Israel is devastating. And the high death toll is part of Hamas's strategy. It's why they use human shields and they hide their infrastructure under civilian sites. And this is why the need to help the genuine, innocent families and citizens, this is why it's essential that the Albanese government conducts proper security screening to ensure that the people who are granted visas to come to Australia are the most deserving, and not those who support Hamas or the terror attacks from October 7, not those who could further the anti-Semitism crisis we already have in this country. OK, commentator Jason Morrison and Sky News host Danica DiGiorgio join me now. Danica, what's your reaction to what I've just revealed tonight?
I'm completely stunned. I'm actually quite horrified, to be honest, Sharri. I do agree with you. In the end, if you're genuine, you want to come here for genuine reasons, absolutely. But the fact is that it's taking 1 hour only to do these security checks. Who do we know? How do we know that these people are the right people to be bringing into this country? As you've just highlighted, there are serious flaws. Nobody from Gaza should be allowed into Australia unless there is complete certainty that they are not a security risk. The question that I'd be asking is how many of those do actually support Hamas? A survey last year found that almost 3 in 4 Palestinians believe the October 7 attack by Hamas on Israel was correct, and that the war has actually lifted support for the group. And that's a problem. We cannot be allowing people with that sort of a mentality into this country. And every day, Labor is looking weaker and weaker on border security.
I mean, Jason, the Prime Minister acted outraged that Peter Dutton was asking the questions. In fact, Peter Dutton was following the reports of us here on Sky News. I've been raising this issue since late last year. But this comes down to Australian values. It's a privilege to live in this country, and we do have a multicultural society. We want it to remain peaceful. We want to protect the peace that we have here, and we're seeing a terrible erosion of social cohesion at the moment.
Well, what you've just told us tonight in that introduction to your program tells us that the government, perhaps, and I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, has inadvertently injected harm into Australia. They have introduced people here who perhaps are not going to be peaceful and perhaps are not going to be cohesive and perhaps are propagandists for a terrorist regime. And if the government has inadvertently, and again I give them the benefit of the doubt on this, done this because they haven't done the checks thoroughly enough, then rip the handbrake up on it tonight and fix the problem. Fix the problem. You get ASIO, you swamp the people that are known troublemakers. You've got the list there. I can even see the names with marks next to them. I mean, if you can find it out, surely they can find it out. And surely they owe Australia explanation tonight as to what they are doing about the individuals and others that have just fallen through a very flimsy net. And the disgrace of this is governments are engaged to do no harm to the population. And I fear tonight that, you know, what you have told us and indeed what possibly is the reality is we are importing a problem. and we don't need that.
Well, just to be clear, I haven't seen any evidence that they're not going to be peaceful or that they might do anything, untoward. It's where their sympathies are. It's the attitude. It's the fact
I see that as a problem, actually.
Liking and endorsing the terror attacks of October 7 at a time when we have an anti-Semitism crisis.
We've already got a very large chunk of Australia that already wants to go and celebrate on the streets about this, and that worries the hell out of us. So.
And the question is, does the government not mind that people are coming into the country who do seem to support the Hamas terrorist attacks, or did we do a better job? Did I do a better job looking into these people than ASIO? And it's one of those two things there. Now let's have a look at another topic. Anthony Albanese is now supporting a move to work from home after the Productivity Commission chair said that remote work wasn't a drag on productivity. Danielle Wood said that it could even benefit the economy. The Fair Work Commission is now investigating if employees should have working from home rights and whether these should be incorporated into industrial awards. Now, Danica, Anthony Albanese and Tony Burke claim that working from home can boost efficiency, but you would absolutely put your hat on it that they're making their own staff to turn up for work while they're trying to say that everyone else who runs a business, their staff should be able to
turn up for work, but also be on call 24/7. We can call you on the weekends. We could call you late at night. So it works very, very differently. Look, now the government wants to put its greasy hands into the way businesses operate. I mean, seriously, I believe this will cause more harm than good. I do not believe in working from home, making it a legal right. In fact, I don't believe in working from home full stop. I can understand for mothers out there, it's better flexibility, sure. But if you're in your 20s or your 30s and you're still sitting at home on your computer in your pyjamas doing your Zoom calls, your Microsoft Teams meeting, seriously, get off the couch and go to work. You don't have to be at home. I don't agree with it. I don't believe businesses can function properly with having half staff at home, half staff in the office. You need staff in the office to be able to foster a good business, to bring people through the ranks. It's better for morale. I mean, look what it's done to the CBDs. Businesses are losing money in the CBDs because nobody's gone back to the office. Offices are actually downsizing. I don't agree with work from home, and I do not believe that by making it a legal right, it's going to cause more issues for business than good.
Yeah. Look, Jason, I think that, as Danica just referred to, for mothers, often, inflexible hours, having to be at your desk, 9 till 6 has been a barrier to women returning to the workforce after they have children. Having flexible arrangements does allow women to participate in the work. And I tell you, there's no one more efficient than a mother because you've got to get your work done before school pickup. But I agree, if you're in your 20s, or you're single, then what's your excuse? You don't need to work from home.
It's become almost the rite of passage, isn't it? The working from work. Who wants to work from work when you can work from... the thing that I find farcical, who are the experts on this at the moment? The experts we're hearing from are ACTU people who've probably never really had a real job outside organising and stirring. The Prime Minister, who's never made a product or service anyone has ever wanted. He's never had a job. The Treasurer, who similarly has never had employment outside of the sector of politics. The Industrial Relations Minister, Mr Burke, similarly, never had a job. I mean, all these people who are experts on how the world works. Employers are not all bastards. Employers are decent people who negotiate with their staff for outcomes that are best for their businesses. And when it fundamentally comes down, the person who's paying the bills gets to make the call. And I think on this front, having people work from work is not an explosively, new age idea. It's something that has worked with degrees of productivity that have been pretty good for a long time. Let's just stay with what we know.
But working from home worked during the pandemic. Fine.
Well, did it?
Well, it did it, but you had to, right? But it was enforced. You had no choice. It worked then. But we've moved beyond that. It's time to go back to the office. We can't keep these practices of years gone by. It doesn't work that way. How can you honestly foster a good relationship with your staff members if you've got 50% of them at home and 50% of them in the office? It doesn't work.
Very difficult for young staff coming through as well. They've got no one to learn from. Now let's have a look at Ukraine. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke to Fox News from the front line about the current situation on the ground. Have a look at this.
We have to be more quick. That means to lose all the bureaucracy what we have. Otherwise, we will not have any chance. To be smart technology, more technologically, and of course, quick. It's not money, it's people lives.
And Zelensky also made the point that he has no plan B if the US doesn't send aid to help them.
This help is crucial, so without it, sorry, but we will have more and more such heroic guys who will be in the hospitals, because if you don't have a real defending shield and some similar powerful artillery with the rounds, of course you will lose people.
Jason, I think people forget sometimes that part of the reason why this is so important is that if the US and other like-minded countries do not stand up to Russia in Ukraine, then it just paves the way for Russia to move on to the Baltic states, to move on to Poland.
Yeah. Russia's not going to pull back on this. I mean, you look at Russia's history in fighting what we would see as border wars. They see as civil wars. They see this as a civil war, and they historically think this is their turf. And I mean, if you don't believe me, I mean, watch the interview that he did with Tucker Carlson. Oh, yeah. For whatever you may have thought of the interview, it's an insight to his thinking. He thinks that's his turf. He wants it back, and he won't stop until he gets it back, or until they stop him, until his side boats him out or gets rid of him. I think when we don't have someone who doesn't know what day it is as President of the United States, things might change a little bit. The West might have a little bit more muscle and a little bit more sense and be respected a little more by Russia, and there might be adequate discussions that end the bloodshed of this. Because, I mean, however you want to interpret it, Russia is progressing on this, and Ukraine is resisting, but it's costing them a generation of people, and that's not good for anybody.
I mean, Danica, the contrast couldn't be more stark between that interview that former Fox News host Tucker Carlson did with Putin, where he just gave him a platform to spend half an hour sprouting Russian propaganda. Just days later, Navalny's murdered. Yeah. And now you have Zelensky showing the situation on the ground.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Zelensky's out there actually showing what's going on the ground. And, you know, if you think back to the early days of the war, it looked as though Ukraine could fall. And thanks to the help of the United States, Australia and NATO allies, they were able to get themselves back on the ground. But I feel like the West is really at a crossroads with this now. Ukraine has not freed all of its territory. And realistically, Ukraine's survival relies upon support from the US and its allies now. I don't think anybody could have imagined that the war would still be going, but if Ukraine loses, the world loses. And I don't think we can honestly say that a Vladimir Putin victory is good for the world. It's extremely dangerous for the world. Look, the West is really at a crossroads, and Ukraine's fighting for its national freedom, and it has every right to do that.
But what is worse for the world is if it gets bigger than what it is now.
Sure.
And that's the delicate line we need to tread, and that's why we need strength in the White House. And I'm not necessarily saying
that's why the current approach works well, because the US is arming Ukraine to fight for themselves. That you know, this is the perfect solution for the moment.
The solution needs to be talk. You're not going to solve this, because Russia's going to keep coming. Yeah. I mean, you know, again, whatever you think of the Carson interview, you've got an insight to the man's resolve, and the man's resolve is he ain't going to stop. He's not going to give up. He thinks it's his.
All right, Jason Morrison, Danica DiGiorgio, thank you both so much. Now, coming up, another leading Queenslander throws in the towel as the crime crisis spirals out of hand, and the Jewish man who was dragged away by police at Monday night's violent clash joins me live. That's after this quick break. Welcome back. Well, the Queensland Attorney-General, Yvette D'Arth, announced she's quitting politics today after 16 years in office, including serving as Health Minister during the pandemic. Yvette D'Arth is the latest in a series of top Queenslanders to quit in the last few months. This list includes Police Commissioner Katarina Carroll on Monday and D'Arth's friend and confidant Anastasia Palaszczuk, the former Premier, in December. With Labor heading to the polls shortly after 9 years in office, it very much looks like rats are fleeing a sinking ship. Joining me now to discuss is Queensland's opposition leader, David Crisafulli. Welcome to the program again, David. Look, this was quite the backflip from D'Arth today.
Indeed it was. It was only a month ago that she said she was there, she was in it for the long haul, and it's another move on. And I guess I wouldn't worry about all of the resignations and the chaos and the crisis and people threatening to go to the crossbench. But let me tell you what happens. the people of Queensland have a government that's not focused on their issues. And in that same period of time, we've had housing figures come out that show we've had the least social housing released and land release in the nation. We've had health figures come out which show ambulance ramping remains at 43%. That's the worst in the country. And we've had a grandmother lose her life going to the shops. That's the consequences of a bad government that doesn't have its attention on its game.
Look, the Violene White case that you're referring to, that grandmother who lost her life going to the shops, that was just so shocking. That was such a wake-up call when it comes to crime in Queensland. It's now become a national talking point. We heard just yesterday in a parliamentary inquiry that the Queensland Police Service is failing to recruit enough officers to keep pace with the state's population growth. Is this part of the reason why crime has been spiralling?
Absolutely, Sharri. The government made a conscious decision 9 years ago to water down the laws. They boasted about it, they bragged about it, and on the back of that, you've got a generation of untouchables. And as a result, police are leaving. They just don't feel like they've got a government that's got their back. And the thin blue line is getting thinner. And at the last election, the state government promised an additional 1,450 extra police. Well, in the last 18 months, that number's gone backwards by 322. So, weaker laws, fewer police. What on earth is the government expecting is going to occur? Of course there's a youth crime crisis, and we're going to keep calling it out. And I assure Queenslanders that if government changes in October, the laws will change. We will get serious about early intervention. We will fix the broken resi care system. The Department of Child Safety will be about the front end in turning kids around. And I'm determined to make sure that there's a better way. And if a government can't keep its community safe, it's failing on the most basic of existence.
I mean, one of the clearest signs that, crime and theft is absolutely exploding is that one of the leading insurance companies, RACQ Insurance, says they've seen a 5% increase in total volume of home theft claims over the past year. Brisbane's South Side had 208 claims in a year. That's an 18% increase. And then the cost of these is rising too. People are having to pay more, 35% higher, because of more property being stolen. I mean, is this becoming the new normal? And do you think many people in, previously safe suburbs are now starting to worry?
I will never accept that that's the new normal, ever. We're a great state, we've got a great future, and things are going to change, and our community is going to get safe again on the back of stronger laws and more police. But you raised the point about insurance. You're spot on. Since this government came to office, the number of people, victims, the number that matters, of people who've had their home broken into is up 60%. And the number of people who've had their car stolen is up 112%. That is a youth crime crisis. And the only people who won't use the words youth crime crisis are the state government who created it by watering down the laws 9 years ago. And the state government is the only level of government that can fix this. It is youth crime laws that is fueling this, and we are determined to show Queenslanders that it doesn't have to be like this.
All right, David Crisafulli, thank you so much for your time this evening. I don't mean to have a completely negative show tonight, but we've just gone from youth crime and now I'm going to talk about anti-Semitism on the streets in Melbourne. We have to raise these issues. They're important issues. And you can't help but wonder if our streets are becoming unsafe, this time for Jews in Melbourne. I mean, we just saw on Tuesday night that some members of the Jewish community, they had tickets to attend a debate at Melbourne City Hall. They had tickets to attend, but on their way in, they were accosted and knocked down by Palestinian protesters as they tried to enter. You can see this in the vision right now. One Jewish man who was pushed over by the pro-Palestinian supporters, he was then dragged away from police. You're watching that now. He was accused of disrupting the peace. Even though he had tickets, he was just trying to walk to Melbourne City Town Hall.
We will discuss this in a moment, sir. You're breaching the peace. I am not. You are breaching the peace.
We actually have tickets to go to the town hall to hear our community talk.
So that's Mark. His wife is Sharon. You just heard her arguing with the police there. I'm not going to say their surnames for security reasons, but they join me live now from Melbourne. Mark and Sharon, thank you both so much. Look, What's your response to being dragged?
Thank you for having us, Sharri.
No, well, thank you for coming on the show and showing your faces and being courageous enough after what you went through. But, you know, what's your response to the police there accusing you of disturbing the peace?
Well, I'm not an expert in navigating violent mobs. I live in Melbourne. I'm a member of the Melbourne MCG. I go there very often, 90,000 people. All I did was I had a ticket. The policeman said, go through that door. I tried to go through the door. I was accosted, assaulted and arrested.
I mean, you were just trying to go to the town hall debate that was going to be on whether the council was supporting a ceasefire in Gaza. You know, it's actually quite shocking that it is now not safe for Jews to walk through the streets in Melbourne. Sharon, how did the protesters know that you both were Jewish and supported Israel?
Well, whether or not we supported Israel was, I guess, a mystery to them, but we were obviously not of their ilk. Mark was wearing a kippah, so perhaps we were identifiably Jewish. I do want to just say one thing. You know, you obviously didn't get the memo from VicPol, which is interesting because you actually said that quite correctly, that we were accused of disturbing the peace, which is in fact what occurred. Interestingly enough, Catherine Moffat, who is the media advisor for VicPol, actually sent out a media release to the entire media in Victoria saying, police removed the men from inside the crowd for their own safety, and when it was discovered they did not have valid tickets to enter Town Hall, they were both moved on from the area. The men did not report being assaulted to police at the time. Interesting, because in those three lines, there are three completely false claims. First of all, own safety. No, you're correct. We were told we were removed because we were breaching the peace. In fact, we were told we created a mini riot. Secondly, the police demanded to see our tickets and we immediately complied, and they admit that on camera. So again, I'm not sure why they would have pushed the line that we didn't have valid tickets. And thirdly, the men did not report being assaulted to police. Repeatedly, we reported being assaulted and questioning with why on earth we were the ones being hauled off out of the town hall that we were trying to get to, and allowing the peaceful protesters, who were far from peaceful, to actually stay there.
Well, that's Victoria Police trying to cover their position, trying to say that they were removing you for your own safety. It's what they said when they arrested Mark Spiro, the one Jew at the Opera House protest 2 days after the terror attacks. But that's them covering their position, because you can clearly hear in that video the police officers accusing you both of disturbing the peace. I mean, you know, you have to look at an incident like this, Mark, and you just wonder whether Victorian police are failing to protect Jews and instead are providing safe passage to these aggressive left-wing protesters.
Well, let's call them aggressive left-wing protesters. I was walking through the city of Melbourne. Many people want to walk through the city of Melbourne. We've had enough of these people all the time carrying on, blocking the streets, abusing everybody. You should hear the names I was called walking through the streets last night.
Zionist pig, for one, and my friends who actually left the town hall afterwards, who'd actually made submissions and made speeches at town hall, when they left they were called genocidal baby killers and everything else. And interestingly enough, like when you talk about the protesters being given safe passage rather than us, you're absolutely right. They're treated as if they're the royal family, with a sidewalk cordoned off for them, and we're asked, you know, how dare we actually walk through them, as if we didn't have all the right in the world to be there, which is really strange. I would have thought if the police were actually trying to keep the peace, their goal would be to allow law-abiding citizens to go about their legal business and maybe remove the protagonists rather than ourselves. And on that topic of the protagonists, this is clearly not their first rodeo. They are absolute experts at surreptitious assaults. Like, I didn't even know how Mark hit the ground. Actually, your video footage last night was actually quite illuminating for us. And also the Real Ructions video, where he was assaulted by exactly the same people
we're
who
have
assaulted
a look
us.
At that.
They actually use their chests. Yeah, they use chest
We're going to have a look at that
and
now.
surreptitious kicks, which they think won't be seen.
Well, let's have a look at this video from the independent journalist Rukshan Fernando. Here it is.
Are you? Sorry? No, I'm working for myself, man. I'm working for myself. I'm working for myself, man. Calm down, bro. Calm down, bro. Calm down. I'm not going to be intimidated, man. Don't touch me. Don't touch me. These people are threatening me. head punched in. For what? Are you saying they're violent?
Mate, you're causing the issue.
I'm not causing the issue. I'm just reporting.
Okay. Well, I respectfully ask you.
You guys have to protect me.
I respectfully ask.
I respectfully ask you.
On the other side of the road. Not in the crowd.
Mark, look, the outcome of this is that Jews who are just trying to peacefully walk through the streets to attend a city town hall debate, you were arrested just for walking through, for being pushed down. You've now obviously made a police complaint, as we reported last night, for the protesters assaulting you. But what's the response now from the Jewish community? Is it that we stay out of the city? Is it that, or do we stand up to the intimidation and be subjected to this sort of treatment? Where does this leave us?
Okay. Well, personally, I can't speak for the community as a whole, which is very difficult to talk for a community. But I myself would be, why do you want to put yourself in danger? Where is safe in Melbourne? I can't go to the Melbourne Town Hall. A friend today said they got accosted outside Zara in the Burke Street Mall. Where is it safe to go and not have these radical people blaring with megaphones? One was, it's just one. Another friend of mine was accosted on the steps of Parliament when going to have a meeting with a minister.
By the same protagonist, interestingly enough.
So it's the same
protagonist. And just on that topic, if the police would have actually been making the streets safe and removed the protagonist after they assaulted us, Rukshan wouldn't have been assaulted 2 hours later.
Well, exactly. Instead of arresting Mark, it's absurd. Mark and Sharon.
And I'm very disappointed that the police have come out with such false statements.
Wow. I mean,
and if they were doing their job, they'd be removing the violent protagonist, not our good selves.
Yeah. You would have cause to take action against the police if you so choose for being falsely arrested. Mark and Sharon, thank you so much.
It wasn't the story intended, but here we are.
Thank you very much for your courage. Now, coming up after the break, the Prime Minister lashes out at the opposition's scare campaign, and illegal boat people are now being identified as economic migrants. All of that with Matt Canavan and Basil Semplis, a great panel. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Well, some of the illegal boat arrivals who are being processed on Nauru have been identified as economic migrants, according to a report in The Australian, and therefore they're unlikely to be granted refugee status. They were allegedly promised by Indonesian-linked people smugglers that they could live a free life in Australia after the High Court's ruling that indefinite detention was unlawful. Now, 62 of those apprehended and sent to the offshore processing centre in Nauru since September have left of their own accord. Let's bring in now National Senator for Queensland, Matt Canavan, and City of Perth Lord Mayor, Basil Semplis. Wonderful to see both of you. So, Basil, I mean, this is clearly people smugglers taking advantage of the High Court's decision.
And no doubt about that. And we've heard many, many times, haven't we, that the people smugglers, they are not in the sort of business where they are hoping to be judged by the high morality or standards that exist largely around the world. They're making their own arrangements based on openings that they can see. If they can see a weakness, they're going to try and exploit that weakness. And so we know that these boats typically arrive when a weakness has been sensed. There's no other reason for them suddenly arriving. And so it's a situation that we understand needs very strong and decisive action and a very clear message to be sent. Otherwise, more and more of these smugglers will attempt to bring more and more refugees on more and more boats. And unfortunately, we know what typically happens, or can happen most tragically, is it can end in disaster, and nobody wants that.
No, with those tragic drownings that we saw under Labor last time. Matt Canavan, look, some people say that this is just a big overreaction to 39 people arriving, but do you think that this could be the start of more boats?
Well, I think it's a test for the Labor government. I very much hope it's not a restarting of this trade, but the reason we need to nip this in the bud now is that, as we've seen from the past, it's very hard to put this bottle back closed if we let this get out of hand. We know that this government hasn't been that strong on border protection since they've come into power. We know that there are elements within the Labor Party that don't have the stomach for the tough decisions required to keep our borders secure. So there's right to be anxious here. There's definite right to hold the government to account. It's a test for them now about whether they can make sure that they stay ahead of the people smugglers. Clearly, they are evolving in how their tactics and what they're doing, and even their transport techniques, presumably. And so the Labor government here now has to respond, because we don't want our coastal border to become anything like the Mexican border in the US or the Mediterranean in Europe. We should thank our lucky stars that Tony Abbott and Scott Morrison over the last 10 years closed our border, and we just got to keep it closed now.
Yeah. Now, big story at the moment is Julian Assange, and there seems to be this major push by Anthony Albanese, actually a bipartisan group of politicians trying to see Assange released, trying to put pressure on America to do this. But we've just heard this week that UK's High Court, it's heard that Assange indiscriminately named sources and encouraged hacking with his decision to publish unredacted classified military and diplomatic documents, and that this directly put lives at risk. Basil, what do you think? Are you of the opinion that he's done his time and should be released, or that he hasn't properly actually been in jail?
Well, he hasn't actually properly been in jail. That much is true. But we know it's a custodial sentence that he's endured for around about 10 years or so now. That does seem a long time. And I guess we ask ourselves the questions. Had he gone to court? Had he properly been tried? What sort of custodial sentence, or what sort of sentence would he have received? I'm not exonerating or suggesting that what he's suggested or guilty of having done should be waved away. We know he's very ill. We've seen those images. We're not sure about his mental state, not sure about his capacity to lead these sorts of activities that he previously led. So, yes, I probably lean to the side of he's been locked up for a long time. Maybe that's about it for now. But a message in some way still needs to be sent. How that gets done, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Look, I've never thought he was a journalist. He won the prestigious Walkley Award, but, he didn't go through the documents and find the information that deserves to be published, which is what we do as journalists. He just dumped it all out there, and he didn't seem to care who would die as a result. Now, Matt Canavan, this is an issue...
Well, Sharri, no one... Hang on. No one has died. No one has died. I disagree with you here. He has released information, but what is... He has no loyalty to the American government. He's not an American citizen. What gives the US the right to come and demand that other people in other countries be extradited to their nation because they've released information about their government? It's an absolute outrage, and it has gone on too long. He should be released. He's now effectively a political prisoner by political interests in the US who are trying to protect the misdeeds that they presided over during the Iraq and Afghanistan war, which were exposed by this WikiLeaks process.
See, people get very passionate about this topic, but you know what? He leaked classified information. It is against the law, and he hasn't paid the price for it.
He's not an American citizen.
Doesn't matter. You break the law anywhere, you have to pay the price for it. And he hasn't done that. He's been on the run.
How can he be subject to American laws?
If you commit murder in Australia, Basil?
And Matt, what if an American citizen was leaking our state secrets, and they were in the United States, and our government wanted to get them back to try them here?
I reckon there's zero chance America would extradite them to Australia. Zero chance.
Okay. But you can ask the question, can't you?
All right, we're out of time. Matt, I was going to speak to you about coal, but we are completely out of time. Matt Canavan, Basil Zempilas, great to have you both on the show. Thank you so much for joining me. Now, after the break, Donald Trump reveals his vice presidential shortlist. Is it only a matter of time before he's the Republican candidate? Stay tuned. Well, the issue of the border crisis in the US is exploding, with thousands of illegal immigrants pouring over the southern border each week. But perhaps you could ask, what should Americans have expected after every single Democratic candidate supported decriminalising border crossings?
Raise your hand if you think it should be a civil offense rather than a crime to cross a border without documentation. Can we keep the hands up so we could see them?
And yet Joe Biden now has the audacity to blame Donald Trump for this crisis.
Every day between now and November, the American people are going to know that the only reason the border is not secure is Donald Trump and his MAGA Republican friends. It's time for Republicans in the Congress to show a little courage, to show a little spine.
It's quite the take. Hudson Institute Senior Fellow John Lee joins me now. Welcome to the program, John. Look, this is emerging as one of the leading issues in the presidential election.
Well, I would say it's one of the top two issues. It's this issue and it's cost of living. You know, you've got 250,000 people per month going through the border. That makes it a major political issue, and it's a real problem for Joe Biden.
What did you think of his response there? The Democrats now trying to blame the Republicans for this.
Well, certainly a morally creative response, but Joe Biden really has to own this. Look, for all Donald Trump's faults, he did largely control the border. He put pressure on Mexico. He had more patrols, and he had tougher rules against people who had made it into American territory. Biden, like the Democrats asked him to do, he dismantled some of that. And once the narrative gets out that America is a soft place, an easy place to go to, we see what happens. Look, Australia has dealt with this, not at the same scale, but once that narrative and once the message gets out, it's very difficult to actually control it. So Biden has to own this.
Look, Nikki Haley says she's not going to quit the Republican nomination race no matter what happens in South Carolina, but it looks like the pressure might be getting to her. She actually became emotional during a speech yesterday, and there's now discussion over whether she should have become so emotional and whether this is the tough image that a future president would want to project. What do you think about this debate? Is it sexist? Is it fair enough?
Look, if I could vote, I would vote for Nikki Haley as American president. So certainly I think she's the best candidate. The problem is that a lot of Americans, and Republicans in particular, they feel under siege. That's the impression I get when I go to the United States. And when you're under siege, you instinctively want a strong, tough leader. Now, Donald Trump is a lot of bad things, but he's the kind of guy that bats away everything that's thrown at him. You've got to say, from that point of view, he's a pretty tough leader. Now, Nikki Haley is as well, but the problem is that perceptions matter in politics, and you can bet that Donald Trump will play this up unfairly, but he will play this up to paint Nikki Haley as weak, unfortunately.
Look, Donald Trump has spoken in a Fox News interview about who could serve in his VP role. He actually seemed to emphasise Tim Scott. What do you think about the list of candidates that he outlined there?
I would prefer Tim Scott because, you know, Tim Scott is a pretty moderate, sensible Republican. He doesn't scare people. And just as we saw with Mike Pence in the first Donald Trump term, Donald Trump, being who he is, needs a straight guy as vice president. People need to feel confident that there's someone in the room next to him that carries that traditional or more moderate Republican view and temperament. If he goes with Vivek or some of the other people that have been mentioned, I think that would
Ron
be both
DeSantis.
political. Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a political and a policy mistake. He needs a traditional, moderate Republican from a temperamental sense.
Well, when I spoke to Steve Bannon on the show a couple of weeks ago, he said that Trump really needs a woman as the VP, but we'll see. We'll see if he gets the candidacy first. John Lee, thank you so much for joining me. And thank you, everyone, for your company this week. I'll see you 8 o'clock Monday. Have a great weekend and stay tuned. Right now, here's Paul Murray.